The moment my daughter-in-law told me to move out of the prime seat at my own birthday party, I didn't push back. I just stared at the catering invoice in my hand, smiled politely, and realized she had just handed me the perfect reason to stop bankrolling her life. "Could you please get up? This table is reserved for my mom." My daughter-in-law, Vanessa, said. Her voice carried a chill that was meant to pierce right through me, right at that exact second. The catering manager handed me the itemized invoice for the entire family gathering. It was my 70th birthday, but Vanessa had seamlessly hijacked the event. Turning it into an exclusive spotlight for her own mother, she flashed a triumphant smile as she gently but firmly nudged me away from the very table I had booked and paid for months in advance. The guests stared uncomfortably at their plates, while my son, Julian, looked away, nervously spinning his drink rather than saying a single word. In my hands, I held the caterer's thick blue folder containing the grand total of $3,500. The room went dead silent as everyone realized Vanessa wasn't the host I was. I felt a surge of heat rush up my neck, but I took a deep breath and kept my composure. No tears, no dramatic scene in front of the extended family. That just wasn't my style. I looked Vanessa dead in the eye, quietly slipped the folder into my purse, and took a seat on a folding chair at the absolute edge of the room. Vanessa's mother proudly claimed my rightful spot, soaking in the attention, completely oblivious to the background shift. I watched the room with sharp precision, and in that split second, I made an unshakable decision about my future. Julian threw a guilty glance my way, but I just offered a cool smile in return. The party dragged on, but my game plan was already locked in as I started putting on my coat later that evening. I noticed the catering manager discreetly following me to confirm tomorrow morning's final payment processing, which handed me the perfect opening for my first move. I gave him a subtle nod, signaled for him to wait, and felt the reins of my life firmly returning to my hands when I got home. I sat down at my kitchen table and spread the invoice out in front of me. $3,500 for a party where I was treated like an unwanted extra. Ever since my husband passed away, I had been financially carrying Julian and Vanessa in almost every aspect of their lives. They lived rent-free in the guest cottage on my property. I paid for their weekly groceries, and I took care of all the landscaping without a second thought. Vanessa had long since viewed my money and labor as a free, eternal perk that she was unconditionally entitled to. But tonight, she had crossed a line. I picked up my phone and called the catering manager, who was still at the venue helping his crew pack up. "Mr. Harrison," I said, my voice steady and calm. "I will be settling the balance via wire transfer as agreed. However, please remove the premium Sunday brunch scheduled for tomorrow morning from my tab." Mr. Harrison paused for a brief moment before politely confirming the change. That exclusive brunch was supposed to be Vanessa's grand surprise for her side of the family, entirely funded by my wallet. Hanging up, the anger dissolved, replaced by a deep, liberating clarity. I walked out to the hallway and looked at the heavy ring of keys hanging on the wall. It was time to completely restructure the economic and physical boundaries of my own home. The next morning, at exactly 8 o'clock, I heard the door to the cottage click open, followed by Vanessa's hurried footsteps heading toward my entryway, likely looking for the leftover gourmet platters she had planned on grabbing. She had no idea the kitchen was closed. The silence in my house was grounding as I brewed my coffee. waiting for her inevitable appearance. I felt a profound sense of inner peace. There was absolutely no reason to hesitate anymore. Things were playing out exactly as I intended. Vanessa stood in my kitchen, her brow deeply furrowed, clutching her smartphone. The catering company just canceled the Sunday brunch. They claimed there was a budget modification. What is that supposed to mean? Evelyn, she demanded, skipping any form of greeting. I finished my coffee in total serenity, set the mug down on the saucer, and looked up at her calmly. I canceled the brunch. Vanessa, my budget for this weekend has reached its limit, I replied matter-of-factly. She let out an incredulous scoff and was about to launch into a loud tirade when Julian walked into the room, looking exhausted. Before either of them could utter another word, I placed a small, metallic object onto the wooden table. It was the spare key to my main house, which Vanessa had been shamelessly using to walk right in without knocking to raid my pantry. Starting today, I intend to fully reclaim my privacy in this house, I explained evenly as I slid the key back into my possession. I had a locksmith out here at 7 this morning to rekey the connecting doors. You have your own cottage with its own separate entrance. Vanessa went pale with shock, and Julian stared at my hands in disbelief. They tried to protest, babbling about a breach of trust and family obligations. But I simply stood up and carried my dishes to the sink. There was no debate, no yelling on my part. I had drawn the physical boundary they had ignored for years. As they walked out of my kitchen in silence, I knew this was just the beginning. The hefty monthly auto transfer I had set up years ago to pad their household expenses was waiting on my laptop for a major adjustment that would change everything. Every move was calculated and precise. I couldn't change the past, but I was fully auditing my future. On Monday morning, I sat focused in front of my computer and logged into my online banking portal. It was a strange sensation of reclaiming my power as I deleted the recurring $500 monthly transfer I usually sent Julian to cover the cottage's utility bills. For years, I had quietly absorbed their electricity, gas, and water costs to give the young couple a leg up as they established themselves. That free ride was officially over. I calmly printed out the bank confirmations and tucked them neatly into 2 separate envelopes. When Vanessa got home from work that afternoon, I was waiting for her out in the shared garden. She didn't even look at me and tried to head straight inside, but I called her over with a commanding tone. I handed her the first envelope. Here is the official utility split, starting the 1st of next month. The meters for the cottage's electricity and heating will be transferred into your names. You'll need to sign the new service agreements yourself, I said, entirely devoid of emotion. Vanessa stared at the envelope like it was toxic waste. You can't do this. Julian doesn't make enough right now to cover sudden fixed expenses like this, she snapped. Then you will have to adjust your spending habits, just like any other adult has to. I coolly shot back. I turned around and walked back into my house, leaving her excuses at the door. That evening, I could hear the muffled sound of a massive, heated argument between her and Julian through the walls. My son was finally waking up to the reality that life on his mother's dime was over. But the real surprise regarding the property was about to hit them completely unawares. It was a release I should have sought a long time ago. 2 days later, I asked Julian to sit down with me for a private talk in my living room. He looked visibly anxious, rubbing his hands together and keeping his eyes glued to the carpet. I handed him a formal, Neatly printed document. It wasn't a legal notice from an attorney, just a standard, market rate residential lease agreement for the cottage that I had drawn up myself. You've been living here rent-free for 3 years. Julian. I began quietly. Starting next month, I'll be requiring a reasonable base rent of $800. That money is going directly into a fund to repair the main roof. My son swallowed hard, his eyes wide. But Mom, we thought this place would eventually be ours, and that we were all supporting each other. He stammered helplessly. The mutual support ended Friday night at the venue when I was kicked away from my own birthday table just so your wife could show off. I replied with quiet, unyielding precision. Julian ran out of counter-arguments. He knew perfectly well that I held the moral and practical high ground. He took the paperwork in silence and left the room with his head down. Predictably, Vanessa went ballistic when she saw the lease. She spent the next few days trying to give me the silent treatment and even told me I couldn't pick up my grandson from preschool anymore. She clearly thought using emotional leverage would break me and force a retreat. Instead, I used that newly cleared afternoon to pay a discreet visit to a local real estate agent downtown to set my next major project into motion, and nobody saw it coming. No one could derail me now. The absolute clarity of my thoughts brought an incredible wave of strength. It was time to leave old burdens behind. The decision was made, and it was irreversible. My meeting with the real estate agent went exceptionally well and opened up an entirely new horizon for me. I learned that my large colonial property with the detached cottage sat in a highly desirable school district and held an incredible market value. Right then and there, I decided to list the entire property for sale and use the equity to buy a smaller, low-maintenance condo down by the lake. When I got back home, I saw Vanessa struggling in the driveway, trying to haul the heavy lawnmower out of the tool shed. Normally, I would have rushed out to do that heavy lifting for her. But today, I grabbed a book, sat on my patio, and simply watched her struggle in total relaxation. She was sweating, cursing under her breath, and throwing furious glances my way. But I remained entirely unfazed. After an hour, she threw her hands up in frustration and left the mower sitting right in the middle of the uncut grass. Julian came to see me later that evening, trying to use a gentle tone to smooth things over. Mom, can't we just talk about this reasonably? Vanessa was just stressed about the party. She didn't mean it that way. We genuinely need your help around here, he pleaded. It wasn't about my well-being. It was entirely about losing their built-in safety net. I am no longer your live-in help. Julian, I am enjoying my retirement now, I stated firmly, drawing a definitive line under the conversation. The next morning, 2 unfamiliar men in business casual attire showed up in my front yard with clipboards and cameras, measuring the exterior of the house. Vanessa's curiosity was instantly piqued, and her composure began to unravel. I felt a deep inner satisfaction. There was no turning back. Things were moving exactly as planned. It didn't take long for Vanessa to burst through her front door and march over to the appraisers with an attitude. What exactly are you doing on our property? She demanded in her usual patronizing tone. The older gentleman glanced down at his clipboard and replied politely, We are conducting a home valuation on behalf of the owner for the upcoming sale of the entire residential lot. Vanessa froze, mid-stride. She whipped her head around toward me as I stood quietly by my open kitchen window, taking in the scene for the very first time. Absolute. Unadulterated panic flashed across her face. Her entire long-term plan of inheriting the property on the cheap while pushing me into a corner dissolved into thin air. She sprinted back inside to call Julian, who came flying up the driveway from work 30 minutes later, looking completely panicked. The two of them knocked aggressively on my front door, but I didn't rush to answer. I purposely let them wait out in the brisk wind for a few minutes. When I finally cracked the door open, Julian stammered, "Mom, are you actually throwing us out on the street? Where are we supposed to go?" I looked at him calmly. "You still haven't signed and returned the lease agreement I gave you. That tells me you have no real interest in securing this living space. I'm simply making my own arrangements based on that." I explained with clinical precision. Vanessa immediately tried to pivot to a completely new tactic. She suddenly offered a heavily forced, sweet apology for what happened at the birthday party. But the mask was entirely see-through. It was far too late, and it wasn't going to soften my heart. Every step was deliberate. I couldn't undo the past. "I am so incredibly sorry, Evelyn. I was just such a nervous wreck that night trying to make sure the guests were impressed, and I wanted everything to be perfect." Vanessa purred with a fake gentleness that made me mentally shake my head. "I truly didn't mean to hurt your feelings." I stood on the porch, looking past her toward the garden. Words don't carry any weight with me anymore. Vanessa, actions are the only thing that matter, I replied. Cool and detached, I handed Julian the formal non-renewal and vacancy notice for their informal tenancy, granting them a standard, state-compliant 6-month window to relocate. Here is your written notice. Since the lease went unsigned, you'll need to find a new place to live by the end of the winter. Julian looked like he was on the verge of tears, while Vanessa snatched the paper out of his hand, her rage bubbling back up. This is completely unfair. We are your family, she yelled, her real voice returning. Family doesn't displace their own mother from her birthday celebration just to boost their own ego. I countered with a freezing tone that immediately shut down any further argument. As the weeks rolled on, the atmosphere on the property was defined by an icy silence. They tried to punish me by ignoring my presence entirely, but it bounced right off me. I spent my days quietly packing up my first boxes of books and family keepsakes. Every roll of packing tape felt like a milestone toward a fresh, independent chapter. When a large moving truck from an appliance liquidator pulled up the following Saturday to retrieve the custom kitchen island I had purchased, Vanessa finally processed the full weight of her blunder. There was no going back. It was a liberation I should have claimed years ago. The contractors carefully disassembled the high-end kitchen island and matching appliances that I had fully funded for the cottage 2 years prior, since I held the original receipts and the items belonged to me. I had sold them online to a young couple a couple of towns over. Vanessa stood paralyzed in the middle of the empty kitchen space, staring at the exposed outlets on the bare wall. Without a functional kitchen, the cottage was barely livable, and they simply didn't have the liquid cash to buy replacement appliances. Julian sat dejectedly on the porch steps, burying his face in his hands. He finally understood that his passivity and cowardly silence were costing him everything. He had stood by and watched his wife humiliate me, and now he was bearing the full brunt of the fallout. Mom, please, he whispered as I walked past him. Can't you just let it slide this once? I paused for a moment, looked at him intently, and said, I've let things slide for years. Julian. And all that did was teach the two of you to completely lose respect for me. I kept moving and signed off on the mover's paperwork. Meanwhile, the buyers for my property had already signed the formal purchase agreement. The sale was legally locked in. Vanessa and Julian were left entirely powerless, unable to manipulate the situation or sabotage my path. They had zero leverage left against me. My financial independence and unyielding resolve had completely disarmed them. The day of my move grew closer, and with each passing day, I felt lighter, more energized, and completely unburdened by the heavy family dynamics that had weighed me down for so long. I felt a deep inner satisfaction. There was no reason to look back. Today, I'm sitting on the sun-drenched balcony of my new lakeside condo, looking out over the calm water. The air is crisp, and the rooms smell like fresh coffee and new cedar furniture. The property is officially sold, and the proceeds are safely invested in my private accounts. Julian and Vanessa were forced to downsize into a cramped, expensive two-bedroom apartment on the edge of town. And they are currently getting a crash course in managing their finances entirely on their own. My son calls me once a week now, and his voice sounds noticeably more mature and respectful than it ever did before. Vanessa completely avoids contacting me, which has brought an incredible, well-deserved peace to my daily life. There is no rushed, artificial reconciliation. And there are no more hollow family gatherings. I have set clear conditions and healthy boundaries that must be strictly respected if they ever want to be a meaningful part of my world again. I don't carry an ounce of bitterness or regret over my decisive actions, only a profound sense of fulfillment. That incident with the seat of honor at my birthday party was actually the best thing that could have happened to me. It shook me awake right when I was slipping into a cycle of being taken for granted. I take a sip of my coffee, lean back into my armchair, and enjoy the quiet afternoon breeze. My life belongs entirely to me again, and I am going to savor every single day of this beautiful, self-directed freedom to the absolute fullest. No one will ever push me out of my rightful place again, because I am the one writing the rules of my own life. The clarity of my choices gave me an unexpected strength. It was finally time to let the past go